The night of December 18th shattered one of Moscow's most carefully maintained illusions that Crimea remains a protected fortress beyond the effective reach of Ukrainian long-range strikes. Just before dawn, explosions lit up the sky over Sevastopol as Ukraine launched a coordinated overnight attack on the Belbek military airfield, one of Russia's most valuable aviation and air defense hubs on the peninsula. The strike was not random, and it was not symbolic. It was surgical, costly, and timed to send a clear message at a moment when the Kremlin continues to project confidence and control. The operation, carried out by long-range drones reportedly operated by the Alpha Special Operations Center of Ukraine's security service, struck deep into what Russia considers secure rear territory. Belbek is not a peripheral base. It is central to Russia's ability to defend Crimea, to launch air operations over southern Ukraine, and to extend radar and air defense coverage across the Black Sea. By targeting it again, Ukraine demonstrated that Russian assumptions about layered defenses and strategic depth in Crimea no longer hold. What made this strike especially damaging was not just the explosions themselves, but what they destroyed. According to Ukrainian officials and multiple Western media reports, the attack eliminated a MiG-31 interceptor, multiple high-value radar systems, and a Pantsir air defense unit. The financial cost alone is estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet the strategic cost may be far higher. Each of these systems plays a specific role in Russia's air defense architecture, and together they form the backbone of Crimea's protective shield. The timing matters. In recent months, Ukraine has intensified strikes on Russian military and energy infrastructure, stretching Russian air defenses while forcing Moscow to divert resources away from the front lines. Crimea has become a focal point of this campaign. As Western analysts note, the peninsula functions as both a launchpad for Russian attacks and a logistical hub supporting operations across southern Ukraine. Weakening it does not just remove weapons, it disrupts an entire operational ecosystem. This is happening against a broader geopolitical backdrop. NATO surveillance assets continue to monitor the Black Sea region, while the United States under President Donald Trump has maintained support for Ukraine's right to strike military targets linked to attacks on its territory. Although NATO forces are not directly involved, Russian planners must assume that Western intelligence sharing, satellite data, and strategic assessments inform Ukraine's targeting priorities. That reality compounds the psychological impact of each successful deep strike. The Kremlin, for its part, responded with near silence. Local Russian officials issued vague statements about air defenses repelling an attack, even as fires burned on the base. The Russian Defense Ministry offered no detailed rebuttal, a pattern increasingly familiar after successful Ukrainian operations in Crimea. Silence in this case speaks volumes. Acknowledging the scale of the damage would mean admitting that one of Russia's most fortified regions is increasingly exposed. This opening chapter of the Belbek strike sets the tone for what follows. It was not merely an attack on equipment, but an assault on assumptions about safety, deterrence, and control. If Crimea can be hit this precisely, what else lies within reach? And more importantly, how long can Russia afford to keep defending a peninsula that is becoming steadily more expensive to hold? Belbek airfield has long been more than just another runway on the Crimean map. It is the nerve center of Russia's air power on the peninsula, a hub where air defense, strike aviation, and radar coverage converge to form a layered shield over southern Ukraine and the Black Sea. That is precisely why Ukraine keeps coming back to it, and why the December 18th strike carries implications far beyond the scorched concrete and twisted metal left behind. Located just outside Sevastopol, Belbek serves a dual purpose. On one hand, it protects Russia's most important naval base in the Black Sea, providing air cover and early warning against threats approaching from the south and west. On the other, it functions as a launch platform for Russian aircraft conducting strikes against Ukrainian territory. Fighter jets, helicopters, and air defense units stationed there extend Russia's reach hundreds of kilometers beyond Crimea itself. As long as Belbek operates at full capacity, Russia retains the ability to pressure Ukraine's southern regions and control airspace over vital maritime routes. That role explains the density of high-value assets Ukraine targeted. Western defense analysts describe Belbek as a keystone base. Remove or weaken it, and the surrounding defensive network begins to fracture. The presence of advanced radar systems allows Russian forces to detect incoming drones and missiles, early Q-fighter interceptors, and guide long-range air defense systems, such as the S-400. Without those sensors, even the most sophisticated missiles become little more than blind weapons. The December strike appears designed to exploit this vulnerability. By degrading Belbek's ability to see and respond, Ukraine effectively shortened the reaction time for Russian defenses across western Crimea. That matters not just for air defense, but for naval operations as well. The Black Sea Fleet relies heavily on land-based radar and air cover to protect ships in port and at sea. Gaps in that coverage increase the risk to vessels already under pressure from Ukrainian maritime drones and missiles. From a NATO perspective, this erosion of Russian control over Crimea alters the regional balance. While the alliance is not directly involved in combat, Western intelligence agencies closely track developments in the Black Sea. Reduced Russian radar coverage complicates Moscow's ability to monitor NATO reconnaissance flights and maritime movements. It also forces Russia to shift air defense assets from other regions, thinning coverage elsewhere and stretching an already overburdened system. The economic implications are just as significant. Maintaining Belbek as a fully operational base requires constant investment fuel, spare parts, trained crews, and replacement systems. Each successful strike raises the cost of doing business in Crimea. According to Western estimates, rebuilding advanced radar systems and restoring full operational capability can take months, not weeks, particularly under sanctions that restrict access to critical components. Every delay weakens Russia's ability to sustain high-intensity operations from the peninsula. Meanwhile, Ukraine's strategy appears increasingly confident. By repeatedly demonstrating the ability to reach Belbek, Kyiv signals that no amount of fortification guarantees safety. This is psychological warfare layered atop physical destruction. Russian commanders must now assume that any asset left exposed in Crimea could become the next target, forcing them to disperse equipment, limit flight operations, or accept higher risk. Belbek, once marketed by Moscow as an impregnable bastion, is starting to look like a liability. And if this cornerstone of Russia's Crimean defense can be cracked open so methodically, the question becomes unavoidable: what happens to the rest of the network when pressure continues to build? At the center of the December 18th strike sits the most symbolically damaging loss of the night: a MiG-31 interceptor reduced to wreckage on the tarmac at Belbek. For the Kremlin, this was more than the destruction of a single aircraft. The MiG-31 has long been presented as one of Russia's unstoppable platforms, fast, heavily armed, and central to Moscow's claims of air superiority. Watching one burn in Crimea cuts directly into that narrative. Designed during the Cold War to hunt bombers and cruise missiles at extreme ranges, the MiG-31 remains a cornerstone of Russia's air defense doctrine. It is not just a fighter, but an interceptor meant to operate as part of a broader detection and response network. From bases like Belbek, these aircraft extend Russia's defensive reach deep into Ukrainian airspace and across the Black Sea, intercepting drones, missiles, and reconnaissance platforms before they reach high-value targets. Losing one is costly. Losing one on the ground while supposedly under heavy protection is humiliating. Ukrainian officials claim the aircraft was fully armed at the time of the strike, potentially loaded for an imminent sortie. Western analysts urge caution on that specific detail, noting that available imagery does not clearly show external weapons. Even so, the core fact remains unchanged: a rare and expensive airframe was destroyed in a zone Russia insists is secure. With estimates placing the value of a MiG-31 at tens of millions of dollars, excluding weapons and maintenance, the financial loss is immediate. The operational loss, however, is longer lasting. Russia's MiG-31 fleet is limited and aging. Open-source assessments suggest fewer than 200 remain in serviceable condition, with only a fraction modernized. Each loss reduces flexibility. These aircraft cannot be replaced quickly, especially under sanctions that complicate access to avionics, electronics, and precision components. Every destroyed interceptor tightens constraints on where Russia can afford to deploy the rest. From a NATO and Western perspective, this matters because the MiG-31 plays a role in countering long-range threats, including cruise missiles and high-altitude reconnaissance. Its removal from Belbek weakens Russia's ability to contest airspace in the Black Sea region, an area of growing strategic interest to NATO members, bordering the alliance's southeastern flank. It also increases reliance on ground-based air defenses, which themselves are vulnerable, as the same strike demonstrated. There is also a psychological dimension. Fighter aircraft symbolize power. They are visible, loud, and closely associated with state prestige. Destroying one on the ground sends a message not only to military planners, but to domestic audiences. Despite official silence, images and reports spread quickly, feeding doubts about the effectiveness of Russia's defenses in Crimea. Crucially, the MiG-31 did not fall in isolation. Its destruction came after the targeting of key radar systems, suggesting Ukraine deliberately neutralized the aircraft's protective ecosystem before striking it. That sequencing matters. It implies planning intelligence and a clear understanding of how Russia's defenses interlock and how to dismantle them piece by piece. If a platform designed to intercept threats at hundreds of kilometers can be destroyed without ever taking off, the question becomes unavoidable: how many other untouchable assets in Crimea are now living on borrowed time? The most consequential damage at Belbek, however, may not have been the burning interceptor, but the systematic blinding of Russia's eyes in the sky. Ukraine's drones did not simply crash into whatever they could reach. They went after radar systems, first stripping away the sensory layer that allows modern air defense to function. In doing so, they exposed a critical weakness in Russia's much-vaunted layered defenses across Crimea. 2 Nebo series radar systems were reportedly destroyed in the opening phase of the strike. These are not simple surveillance radars. They are high-powered detection platforms designed to provide long-range awareness, track dozens of targets simultaneously, and feed data to both fighter aircraft and surface-to-air missile batteries. Western analysts often describe them as the backbone of Russia's early warning network in contested airspace. Without them, reaction times shrink dramatically, and coordination between systems begins to break down. According to defense specialists cited by European and American outlets, the Nebo family is specifically intended to counter stealthy or low observable threats, including drones and cruise missiles. Their presence at Belbek was meant to ensure that Crimea could not be surprised. Yet on December 18th, surprise is exactly what happened. Whether due to saturation, electronic interference, or simple tactical sequencing, the radars failed to prevent their own destruction. Once they went dark, the rest of the defense network was effectively operating blind. The loss did not stop there. Ukrainian drones also struck a critical fire control radar associated with the S-400 system, widely promoted by Moscow as one of the most advanced air defense platforms in the world. This radar is the system's brain, responsible for tracking targets, guiding missiles, and coordinating engagements across multiple launchers. Without it, an entire battery can be reduced to an expensive collection of launch tubes with severely degraded effectiveness. Western military analysts estimate that a fully deployed S-400 battery represents an investment approaching $500 million when radars, launchers, missiles, and support vehicles are included. Taking out a single key radar can neutralize much of that investment overnight. In practical terms, it means fewer intercept opportunities, greater uncertainty, and a higher likelihood that future Ukrainian drones or missiles will slip through. The destruction of a Pantsir short-range air defense system completed the picture. Designed as a last line of defense against drones and precision-guided munitions, the Pantsir is supposed to protect high-value assets like radars and aircraft. Its failure at Belbek underscores a recurring theme in this war: systems built to defend other systems are themselves increasingly vulnerable. For NATO observers, this sequence is instructive. It highlights how modern air defense is only as strong as its weakest sensor. Remove detection and coordination, and even the most advanced missiles lose much of their value. It also reinforces Western assessments that Russia's air defense network, while extensive on paper, struggles against coordinated multi-layered attacks. The strategic implication is stark. With Belbek's radar coverage, degraded gaps open not just locally, but across Western Crimea and parts of the Black Sea. Those gaps invite follow-on strikes. And once a defensive network begins to unravel, restoring it under constant pressure becomes exponentially harder. The question now facing Russian planners is not whether Belbek can be repaired, but whether it can be reliably defended at all if Ukraine keeps pulling at the same threads. Beyond the flames and shattered hardware, the Belbek strike delivers a deeper wound measured in economics, logistics, and long-term sustainability. Each destroyed system represents not just a tactical loss, but a cascading financial burden for a Russian military already stretched by prolonged war and sanctions. When viewed through this lens, the December 18th attack looks less like a single blow and more like an accelerant poured onto an already burning balance sheet. Western defense analysts estimate that the combined value of the destroyed interceptor radar systems and air defense units reaches into the hundreds of millions of dollars. But replacement costs tell only part of the story. Advanced radar systems, such as Nebo platforms and S-400 fire control radars, are complex to manufacture, reliant on specialized components, trained crews, and lengthy calibration. Under sanctions, sourcing electronics and precision parts becomes slower and more expensive, often requiring workarounds that degrade quality or reliability. Every destroyed unit thus represents months of lost operational capability, not merely a line item in a defense budget. The logistical impact compounds the damage. Crimea is geographically constrained, dependent on limited supply routes for heavy equipment. Transporting large radar components or air defense vehicles to the peninsula is neither quick nor discreet, especially under constant surveillance. Each movement becomes a potential target. That forces Russia to either accept delays or divert scarce resources to protect shipments, further stretching capacity elsewhere. From a strategic standpoint, this erosion has ripple effects across the wider war. Resources poured into repairing Crimean defenses cannot be used at the front. Every radar rebuilt in Sevastopol is one not reinforcing air defense coverage over Russian industrial regions or occupied territories. Analysts at Western think tanks note that Ukraine's approach increasingly forces Moscow into reactive spending, plugging holes, rather than pursuing initiative. Over time, that imbalance favors the side applying pressure rather than the one responding to it. NATO planners are watching closely. While the alliance remains formally outside the conflict, its strategic calculus depends on Russia's ability to project power in the Black Sea. As Crimea's defenses weaken, Russia's margin for error narrows. This influences everything from naval posture to aerial patrol patterns. Reduced confidence in Crimean air defense may compel Russia to operate more cautiously, indirectly reshaping the regional security environment without a single NATO missile being fired. There is also a domestic dimension. Moscow continues to promote Crimea as stable and secure, even as the cost of maintaining that narrative rises. Repeated strikes undermine investor confidence, tourism prospects, and civilian morale. While these factors do not decide battles, they feed into the broader economic strain of war, one that Western analysts argue Russia can absorb only at increasing political cost. Taken together, the Belbek strike illustrates a shift in Ukraine's campaign from symbolic disruption to sustained economic attrition. The goal appears to be making each additional day of holding Crimea more expensive than the last. If that trend continues, the question shifts from how much Russia has lost to how much longer it can afford to keep paying. Seen in isolation, the Belbek strike is a dramatic success. Seen in context, it is part of a much larger and increasingly coherent Ukrainian strategy aimed at turning Crimea from a strategic asset into a strategic liability. Over the past year, Kyiv has steadily expanded the scope and ambition of its operations on the peninsula, moving from opportunistic attacks to a sustained campaign designed to hollow out Russia's military presence piece by piece. Western analysts describe this approach as cumulative pressure. Early strikes focused on Russian naval assets, forcing the Black Sea Fleet to withdraw or disperse. That was followed by attacks on logistics hubs, ammunition depots, and fuel facilities, many of them tied directly to Russia's energy infrastructure. Each phase reduced Crimea's usefulness as a staging ground. The Belbek operation fits squarely into the next phase, neutralizing air defenses and aviation assets that enable Russia to strike Ukraine and protect its remaining forces. The strategic logic is clear. Crimea anchors Russia's posture in the Black Sea and supports operations across southern Ukraine. If that anchor weakens, Russia's ability to project power declines sharply. NATO assessments increasingly reflect this reality. While alliance forces are not engaged, Western intelligence sharing and surveillance benefit from reduced Russian radar coverage and diminished air defense confidence. Every successful Ukrainian strike forces Moscow to reassess risk flight patterns and force allocation decisions that ripple outward across the theater. From Washington's perspective, under President Donald Trump, this trajectory reinforces a long-standing view that Ukraine's ability to strike military targets linked to attacks on its territory is legitimate and strategically effective. Publicly, Western governments emphasize restraint and escalation management. Privately, many acknowledge that degrading Russia's Crimean stronghold limits Moscow's options without requiring direct NATO involvement. For Russia, the dilemma deepens. Crimea cannot be abandoned without immense political cost, yet defending it grows more expensive and less certain by the month. Each new repair invites another strike. Each redeployed system creates a vulnerability somewhere else. Over time, this dynamic risks turning the peninsula into what some analysts describe as a sinkhole for resources, consuming manpower, money, and prestige while delivering diminishing returns. The Belbek strike therefore represents more than destruction. It signals momentum. If Ukraine can keep dismantling Crimea's defenses faster than Russia can rebuild them, the strategic balance in the Black Sea shifts decisively. And once that balance tips, the question may no longer be whether Crimea can be held, but whether holding it is worth the price. Ukraine's December 18th strike on Belbek airfield marks a turning point in the battle for Crimea. In a single night, Ukrainian drones destroyed or disabled some of Russia's most valuable military assets: a MiG-31 interceptor, advanced radar systems, and key air defense units. The immediate financial damage runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars, but the deeper impact lies in what those losses represent: eroded air defense, weakened strike capability, and growing uncertainty over Crimea's security. Section by section, the picture becomes clear. Belbek is not just a base. It is a cornerstone of Russia's control over southern Ukraine and the Black Sea. Blinding its radars paralyzes defenses. Destroying aircraft undermines prestige and capability. For NATO and the West, these developments quietly reshape the regional balance without direct involvement. For Moscow, they raise the cost of holding a peninsula it claims is permanently secure. Looking ahead, the trend points toward sustained pressure. If Ukraine continues to dismantle Crimea's defenses faster than Russia can rebuild them, the peninsula risks becoming a strategic burden rather than a shield. So, here's the key question. Is Crimea slowly turning from Putin's strongest card into his most expensive mistake? If this analysis helped clarify what's really happening behind the headlines, subscribe to the channel for in-depth, fact-driven coverage of the war's next critical